Dr. Brian Chad Starks is a speaker, writer, and critical criminologist. He was born and raised in Columbia, South Carolina, attended Richland County Public Schools, and graduated from Columbia High School. Dr. Starks attended Wofford College, where he played football and majored in sociology. For more than 20 years, he's worked to build social justice and equality and equity for individuals, organizations, and communities. The former owner of B. Chad Bonding, Dr. Starks holds a master's degree in criminal justice from the University of South Carolina and a doctorate in criminology from the University of Delaware. Dr. Starks defended his dissertation, A Belle of Two Cities, examining the first criminal court phase, Atlanta versus Philadelphia, in August 2012. In his dissertation, Dr. Starks examined the social organizational structure of the bail systems of Atlanta and Philadelphia. He's been on faculty at Lynchburg College, Delaware State University, and Benedict College. Dr. Starks also serves as an associate director with the Delaware NASA Space Grant Consortium, where he works to increase minority student representation. In 2014, Dr. Starks was awarded the Lewis L. Redding Diversity Award from the University of Delaware. This award honors individuals who have implemented diversity programs that resulted in a significant change to the culture and climate of the university. In 2016, Dr. Starks received the NAACP Civil Rights Award from the Lynchburg, Virginia branch. He was also inducted into the 2016 Wofford College Athletics Hall of Fame. Dr. Starks is an active member of his community, serving on the board of directors for Big Brothers Big Sisters and Beacon of Hope. He is a proud member of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated, and as CEO of BCS and Associates consulting firm, Dr. Starks travels around the country speaking and teaching the truth about implicit bias, cultural competency, and structural inequality. Dr. Starks?
Thank you, Dana. I would first like to acknowledge WIFF, Greenville branch of the NAACP, as well as the city of Greenville, for having the courage not only to have these conversations, but to have an opportunity for us to have an authentic and genuine conversation. I've been fortunate enough to be invited to be the keynote speaker here, and I will first start off by expressing my gratitude. Whenever I'm invited to have this conversation, I'm always grateful and appreciative that my work and my purpose has been acknowledged by others. I represent my ancestors. I represent the diverse people that have stood in front of injustice, that had the courage to fight in order for black and white folks to walk along the same lines of opportunities. I represent the marginalized. I represent those folks that do not have the voice and the opportunity to be in this room today. America, Greenville, the state of South Carolina, I'm a product of your environment. I'm a proud public school graduate from Columbia, South Carolina, that often is registered with deficits. We often hear the conversation about education in this country, where we stand 28th in this country, but we often applaud our education pursuits. There's two types of education that I really want to hone in on today. Informal education, as we often talk about, K through 12 and higher education, but the value of informal education. I was raised in one of these communities, often defined in the sociological literature as being deprived of resources. That's often been regulated to alcohol, drugs, those constructs that we see as deficits, but some communities aren't able to hide. When you're black in this country and you are born in poverty, you're a commodity. I didn't know until I got to the PhD program in the University of Delaware how sexy black was. There's billions of dollars in higher education that's been allotted for National Science Foundations, National Institute of Health. How many agencies are focusing their pursuits on people that look like me, on people that look like us that are in these communities? Black Americans have always been commodities in this country. There's every institution that we've talked about today that has benefited financially off blacks. We help build the country that we often aren't included when it comes to conversations of economic wealth, healthy love, advancement, or opportunity. There is no achievement gap. Let the PhD, this form of education, serve as it may. There's so much literature about achievement gaps in this country that we forget to have a real conversation. America, Greenville, South Carolina, it is time to tell the truth. Education gap is a synonym for lack of access to resources. Think about Brown v. Board in 1954, the integration of our schools. How many of you ever heard the conversation that African Americans did not want to integrate schools? We wanted access to resources that the white schools had. We've taken opportunities and the voices of the marginalized, and they've been co-opted. They've been co-opted so white America can feel good about putting a step forward to what needs to be a big foot towards equity. We often use these terms interchangeably, but I'm going to challenge us to raise our level of consciousness. 1964, it was okay to talk about equality. We've taken some small steps, and we've let some folks off the hook when it comes to accountability. We don't want equality anymore. We want equity. What exactly is equity? Equity is meeting people where they are, which means that you have to look through a different perceptual lens in life and understand the structural inequality that has created the trauma over and over and over in our communities. That takes courage. That takes courage to step outside of yourself and understand what the country has done intentionally to create barriers. I'm asking you to change the way we think about equality and substitute that with what we call equity, which means that resources will be redistributed that may advantage others that had not have access to resources. It's time to intentionally impact the black community unapologetically. It is time to acknowledge that we have not done race right. The only way we can begin to heal Greenville, South Carolina, and America is to acknowledge the pain that we have inflicted on each other. We do understand that diversity is more than checking a box on physical eye tests, right? It's amazing the intellectual acumen that we have in this country, but all of a sudden, white American can claim ignorance when it comes to institutional racism. I stand before you representing George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Eric Garner, Mike Brown. See, the issue with those names is that those are the ones that received the media attention. For 401 years, there's been parallel names that have been forgotten about. There have been parallel identities for less reasons that have been murdered in structural violence. I hate to bring this to you, but I have a responsibility of those that even died for me to participate in those predominantly white institutions where I learned to critically think, where I learned to express myself in a different way other than anger and frustration. I learned to put my trauma in writing. I learned to research. I learned to use the access to the resources that have been denied so many people that look like me to put it back in a certain way to be in this position. Ironically enough, I once assumed that my confirmation bias of degrees was going to protect me. 22 years of education I have. When I walk into a Walmart, when I walk into a gas station, how many of you will assume that I travel the country and people call me doctor and write down what I say? I don't walk in with a blazer and corduroy elbow patches. I have to deal with not only my identity, but my group identity as being a black male, which means that I'm going to be subjected to the stereotypes, no offense to WIFF today, but the media is an institution that also has participated in oppression. Meaning, the first 4 minutes of every news segment, in a 30-minute segment, what do we see? We see the worst parts of our city. We unconsciously are attracted to the negative, and guess who gets to be the result of such, my community. No one knows what I do when you physically look at me. Have we reached the dream and the goals of what Dr. King wanted? Some of us are way too comfortable thinking that we have come so far. 1968, when it comes to economics, $6,000, as the brother shared earlier, was the annual median income for blacks. At the same time, keep in mind now, this is a few years after the Fair Housing Act and the Civil Rights, so reform and efforts were being made. It was $70,000 for a white household. 2016, the annual salary in a median household of black America was $13,000. This is middle class, folks, $13,000. I don't know where y'all live, but what can we do in $13,000? Guess what the median household income was for white Americans? $149,000. I tell you about the degrees I have and the number of years in school because with a PhD, my median annual household income is equivalent to a white male with a high school diploma. We keep talking about this formal education. How can we afford formal education when we can't even make more than $13,000 a year? I graduated from an institution that costs over $50,000 to attend now. Guess the way that I can get there? Like most young black men, and now precious enough, young black ladies, is through athletics. But at the same time, we have coaches that come into our house, to our homes, that tell our parents that if you trust your baby with me, I'm going to take good care of them. I'm going to love them in a way that is an extension of your love. My mother gave me love like another of us. They taught us to fear in order to make it home. That love was a protective source of baby. Don't go to those white folks' school and get in trouble. How many of you have ever had that conversation with one of your African-American students or friends to help you understand the perceptual lens of how the duality of being in one place physically, where you consciously have to be somewhere else in order to survive? Going to Wofford was not easy. But just because I survived it doesn't mean that the system was set up for me to survive. It takes a great deal of humility as well as courage to face these intentional barriers that we know have been placed in front of us. When we start talking about these constructs today, I want you to think about 5 numbers, and those 5 numbers are a zip code. You can look at the zip code in this country and you can find out everything you want to know about America. Just take a second. Think about low educational attainment in your zip code. Think about the health conditions. Think about poverty. Thinking about the criminal justice statistics in your community. I mentioned medium, middle-class homes. Each and every one of us, right? If we're moving into a neighborhood, we want to see what the crime statistics look like. We want to see what our schools look like. Even though all the research says that these numbers that we, as academics, we use to teach the young folks about how to think about crime and justice, how to think about education. Can you believe that most of those statistics have flaws in it? Can you believe that there's a number of law enforcement agencies that are not forced by the federal government to report certain statistics? Do you know that at one point in time that there was only 2 racial identities that were recorded, which was black and white? Do you know that most often that crime has been racialized by those in positions of leadership? There's something about our education informally that has allowed me an opportunity to bring a different lens to this country when it comes to formal education. We need to teach the truth, America. Why are we so afraid of the truth? If we stand on the virtues that we dangle the carrot in front of our youth, then we would love them differently, would we? We don't speak the same language. Race is a social construction used to divide us, and Abe has done a very good job. What about this term love that we dangle in front of each other? I know in the community where I come from, we do a great deal of struggle love. My people are very fatigued of slow singing and flower bringing. We tired of the faithful spirituality that we had to use in slavery to make it through the next day. The forgiving of the structural violence is wearing us down. We are very fatigued with the trauma that comes with the responsibility of representing an entire race, trying to figure out how to go into an oppressive system that intensely have oppressed us, listen to the meritocracy opportunities, go to school, have a double consciousness, speak one language here, be rejected by your community when you go home, come back, as you said, get the degrees, come back to the community that you claim to serve, and now put it in a box with a red bow so white people can feel comfortable that we should do something different. We can't do all of that. That beat down emotionally is heavy. This is a call for action. This is a call for a new definition of love. Why do we wait until something happens in this country like murder to start having these conversations? 401 years we've tried what we say to do reform. I'm not the smartest person in this room. I'm not the smartest person in this country. But the resources we have and the intellectual acumen, you mean to tell me we can't fix racism? You can't tell me that we can't fix what we want. We sending people to moons, we finding other planets, but for some reason, that black and brown identity, it presents so many threats to majority. Haven't figured it out yet, especially being from the Bible Belt of the country in South Carolina and how religion is used to preface everything. I'm confused when I get emails and phone calls from white pastors says that if Chad is advocating as an anti-racist, then he must be the racist one. I'm confused why we are using certain literature historically that has ordained slavery as a positive, and you're asking me that I need to accept my conditions and wait till a higher power has a conversation with me in order for salvation to be worthy to my soul. I want my people to have it now just like you have it, white America. We stand before you as an opportunity right now to come to the table and join us. I share this most often that we, and sadly to say, we could not have had a better opportunity to unite. COVID-19, again, America has exposed the disparities in this country. Me putting on a mask and walking in Walmart, 3 or 4 months ago, law enforcement would have been called. Xenophobia, racism, simply by the way of dark skin and long hair, I would have been a threat. Ironically enough, 22 years of education and the comfortableness to have these conversations, I'm still a threat. I'm not exactly sure what you want me to do. I'm not exactly sure what you want others that are advocating for us to do. It is so difficult when we are faced with, well, I'm afraid. How many of you are parents? How many of you have had a conversation about how you get your kids home at night? We're talking about feelings compared to life, and I'm not trying to minimize anyone's emotional state, but I just laid out a nice blueprint to where emotional wellness, I don't think it's a part or appreciated in our community. I don't think America really understands the trauma that we face each and every day when it comes to waking up and navigating these spaces. It takes fear as well as courage. I'm asking you to not allow fear be the reason why you don't. Do not allow fear to be the reason why you don't. You have to compartmentalize. There's some informal strategies that we can help you with, white America, to get over the fear. Meaning, Chad Starks, as my mother would say, get up and go to school, be a good boy, and get your education. Don't tell nobody what happens in your community. Don't let them see your idiosyncrasies. We've had to hopscotch. We've had to do double dutch. We've had to navigate spaces where we never should have been able to survive. I'm asking you to be comfortable in us and change that definition of love. Come into the room with us. Come into the room open with your ear on the ground and be prepared to listen, but open up your hearts and your spirits so we can educate you on what it is to be the minority. Minority is a term that I wish we could get rid of. It doesn't really identify who I am. I'm not a minority. I went to your schools, got your training, your education, and 1% of the world has the degrees that I've been fortunate enough to earn. Guess what that does? That puts me in a position of being a majority. Now I understand that my value and my worth is different, and I take that back to my community. Because there's a chess game that America has asked us to play. Some of us are better at it. Some of us have different access to resources. Some of us can get access to decent health care. You're making $13,000 a year in 2016, where you going to pay health care at? This is a country that takes advantage of the most vulnerable people at the most vulnerable time. Poverty, elderly, sick, the incarcerated. Everything that we're discussing here today, everything that we're discussing is about us being commodities in order to make someone else money so they can hide behind their true identity. We're fatigued, folks. We're tired of being used so other people can advance their generational wealth. You don't think I want a trust fund for my grandbaby? I would like to be able to create one. I just don't want to do it off the backs of anyone that's vulnerable. I ask that you take a long look into the mirror. Get uncomfortable to get comfortable. It's okay not knowing something. It is okay admitting that I do not know what to do. The problem with that is that a lot of us have been able to have jobs in leadership positions and not know what to do. I'm asking that you take a step back. I'm asking that you create different relationships, not only professionally, because if we wait until we get a job to start having these conversations, it's too late. Why is that? Society says that you should have a nice house in the suburbs or a neighborhood, and your kids should go to good schools, and you should have a savings account. When you start including those constructs, then everyone is going to start thinking about Darwinism. They're going to start thinking about self. How can I continue to survive? Well, I'm asking you to raise your ethic of care, because guess what are the most selfish things to do in this lifetime? People think it's very easy, but the hardest thing to do is to care. You know why it's hard? Because your pronouns have to change. Your pronouns go from I, me, to they, them, which means that you are now responsible for thinking about what someone else is going through. That's a very big haul, isn't it? Because we're conditioned to actually think that we've gotten here on our own. No, we have not. We have not gotten here on my own. I started this conversation off by thanking those that died in order for me to be in this position. There was no way I would have been a student at Wofford College without someone, hopefully, like what I'm sent to do, stood up in front of injustice and said we need integration in a different way. Higher education, disproportionate representation of faculty members, we are way behind in our colleges in the state of South Carolina. I do not understand in 2020 why we do not understand the value of not only black students, Hispanic, brown students, Asian students, the value of white students seeing PhDs in front of them and presenting information and education through a different lens. I'm an educator, which means I am absorbing any opportunity to learn. But for some reason, when it comes to race, we limit certain populations to certain ways of thinking. It's done on purpose, folks. If I stand up at Clemson University to have a conversation about crime, my colleague may have a different one. Now you got two perspectives. Doesn't that empower you to be more positioned whenever a different job comes your way, that you are equipped with the skills to do it? So now we can't hide behind the ignorance of not knowing about institutional racism. What is in your toolbox? Does a carpenter take a screwdriver to every job? Does a carpenter take a hammer to every job? We need more tools in our toolbox. The literature of K through 12 talks about deviant behavior, how to protect the good kids from the bad kids. I'm not sure what country y'all live in, but if you step outside that classroom, it is a microcosm of America. that we need to be responsible and held accountable for. There's no such thing as good and bad. I'm over the nice people. Nice people in the South has continued to keep us oppressed. I take a mean, mad, angry person all day that's going to honor the social contract that all of us unconsciously have signed into. I want to change the definitions. I want love to be about prevention. I want our community to be respected in a way like other identities are. We need to come together. This is a rally cry. This is a call for action. But we need to become aware and conscious. We need more education informally. No matter how good or bad Chad Starks may be in these conversations, y'all not going to invite me home for dinner. Y'all not going to ask me to come carve the turkey on Thanksgiving. So just the way these unconscious racist, oppressive statements and ways of thinking has been passed along through legislation and policies, I don't think that's the entirety of it. I think family is the first institution that begins to separate us. What conversations are you having with your children about people that look like me? When did you tell her to be afraid of me? At what age? Because you think about little children in a sandbox, the 2-year-old Brian Starks, who may turn to Lillian and hit her on the hand, every parent, every adult will come, and they're going to pick Lillian up and they're going to hug her. And they're going to come to Brian and they're going to say, Brian, you shouldn't hit Lillian. Brian is going to begin to cry. He's going to hold himself accountable. He's going to apologize to Lillian and hope he has not done life damage to her. Where's that moral responsibility as adults? How many of us watch Brian hit Lillian over and over and over in this sandbox of society, and we turn our heads and we walk away? But yet you want me to think you love me? I need you to protect me from danger. I need you to stand in front of the storm when you see it coming because you're more prepared. You're in a position of leadership, which means that you have a responsibility to prevent the storm from coming to me, just as I do. I want to take this opportunity to say, NAACP, thank you. I've been a member since about 18 years old. My brother was the first one to introduce the NAACP to me. I owe you for having a platform for African Americans as well as whites to come together to create a new definition of what we call diversity, to create a new definition of what we need to do to prevent struggle love from continuing to be the identity in the black community. We want some healthy love. So let's change the way we do this thing. I'm asking that you join us. Does not have to be in a formal way. You can start being messengers of social justice by simply having a different conversation about race, having a different conversation of how to love each other holistically and not apologize for it. I come to you today on my knee. I'm asking for it because we have an opportunity from a glass half full. The time is now. We could not have afforded ourselves, none of the scientists, social scientists, could have not have predicted that on the backs of COVID-19, while we were at home, very frustrated, not being entertained by sports, that we would have to take a look in the mirror and have a deep dive into racism. Thank you all for allowing Brian Chad Starks to be here. Thank you for having the courage. And I believe in you. And I hope that we're going to create some real structural change, not only in the city of Greenville, but in the state of South Carolina, but in the entire country of America. Thank you.